Shalom everyone, hope everyone's doing well. Be'ezrat Hashem, today in Masechet Sanhedrin, we're going to learn Chaf Bet Amud Aleph 22a. We will begin at the Mishnah, middle of the page, and we'll learn towards the bottom of the page. We're going to have two sections in today's learning. First section we'll deal with is the proper respect we have to have for the king of the Jewish people requires that we also treat the king with a tremendous deference. It's a certain respect to maintain that respect level that the Jewish people view their king. The second section we'll deal with is a related section, but really a different point, which is we'll talk about the sadness or severity of divorce, of losing one's wife. It's also a very interesting discussion we'll get to today, Be'ezrat Hashem. So our learning today should be as a zechut, a merit for refuah shlema, speedy and quick recovery for Yaakov ben Dinah. And we begin at the Mishnah, about halfway down Chaf Bet Amud Aleph. The Mishnah tells us as follows: Ein rochvin al suso, that others cannot ride on the horse of the king, ve'ein yoshvin al kis'o, and others cannot sit on his throne, ve'ein mishtamshin b'sharvito, nor can other people use his scepter, his staff. Ve'en ro'in oto kishu mistaper, you can't look at him when he's getting a haircut. Ve'lo kishu arum, nor when he's not dressed, he's naked. Ve'lo kishu bebeit hamerchatz, nor when he is in the bathhouse. All of these are shene'emar, because the pasuk tells us, Som tasim alecha melech, you shall surely place a king over you, which means it's important that the Jewish people maintain that level of awe, shetehei mato alecha, meaning to say is that his awe should be placed over the Jewish people. It's a very interesting concept. Using his horse or his scepter, or seeing him in a less than respectful state, could denigrate our perspective of the king, even in a minor way, and that would take away from this factor of always having awe for the king. Therefore, these behaviors would be prohibited in relation to the king. Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Yochanan. Now, Rav Yaakov, Rav Yochanan is going to comment on a story that happened at the beginning of Melachim Aleph. At the beginning of Melachim Aleph, we find a story where David HaMelech, at the end of his life, just before his passing, he was older and he was very cold. And no matter how many clothing they put on him, they were not able to warm him up. Actually, Chazal teach us, I believe Rashi quotes it over there, is that this was actually a punishment. Because during his lifetime, David in some way denigrated clothing. It's back a story with Shaul HaMelech where he cut the corner of clothing, caused it to become unusable. So when he got old, he was punished that clothing couldn't warm him either. So as we'll see, his officers gave a suggestion that he should find a young woman, specifically a betula, a virgin girl, because they promote more body heat apparently, and he should not marry her, but she should simply serve him. So he wasn't going to be intimate with her, just that she would be next to him, providing him with some warmth, interesting idea, and serve him. So the Gemara tells us, as we'll see, he didn't actually marry this girl, who was Avishag. That was the name of this girl. She just serviced him in this way that she provided him with warmth. And apparently the Rishonim there speak out maybe other things that she did for him as well, in terms of taking care of storage houses and things like that. But there was no intimacy. Interesting thing. So let's see the Gemara. Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Yochanan. Avishag, this Avishag, muteret l'shlomo va'asura la'adoniyah. So after the passing of David, she would have been muteret, she wouldn't permitted to Shlomo, but prohibited to Adoniyah. It's very interesting. What happened was, after this Adoniyah, this was one of the sons of David HaMelech who rebelled against him. Now his rebellion was eventually quelled, and he was not killed in the lifetime of David. But what happened was, after the passing of David, Shlomo was appointed to the throne, based on the command of David HaMelech in his lifetime. And another of the sons, Adoniyah, appeared to accept Shlomo as the rightful king, but he requested that he be allowed to marry this Avishag, who was servicing David HaMelech in his lifetime. So the Gemara comments, Rabbi Yochanan tells us, it would have been mutar for Shlomo to have her service him or marry him, but not for Adoniyah. Now, why is that? Muteret l'Shlomo, she would have been permitted to Shlomo de Melech Hayahu, Melech Mishtamesh b'Shavito Shel Melech. Because Shlomo was a king. He was actually the real king. And it's permitted for one king to use the scepter, in this case, the servant of another king. That doesn't denigrate the malchut of the previous king. But Va'asurela Adoniyah, she would have been prohibited to Adoniyah because, Va'asurela Adoniyah, why? Because because ultimately Adoniyah was not a king. He was a commoner in this way. And actually that's how the story goes, is that Adoniyah requested that he be allowed to marry her. Shlomo took this as an affront to the malchut because since she was like Sharvito Shel Melech, she was like the scepter of the king in the sense that she serviced David, this was an act of merida, of moed b'malchut. It was like a rebellion against the malchut because it was essentially suggesting that Adoniyah was fit to be the king and not Shlomo, and actually Adoniyah was killed. That's the story over there. Says the Gemara, Avishag Mahi, what was the story with Avishag? Dichtiv, because the pasuk says Melachim Aleph, it says like this. Va'melech David zaken ba bayamim vegomer, it says the king was old and he wasn't able to be warmed by clothing. So his servant said, why don't we seek out a young girl who could warm you? And the pasuk says, they found a beautiful girl. And it says in the pasuk, she was very beautiful, this Avishag. She was a warmer for the king, and she served him. So what happened in the story here? Amra, Avishag said to the king, Ninsivan, you should marry me, means let's get married. So Amar La, the king said to, David said to her, Asiratli, you're prohibited to me, because I already have 18 wives, as we learned earlier, Kahena v'Kahena, remember the drashot, and therefore I'm not allowed to marry another one, so I cannot marry you. So Amar Le, she said back, and this is a very strong statement she's about to say. We're going to learn Kipshuto, as Rashi explains. Chasre leganva, when a thief is lacking, she said back an expression that was essentially a dig against David. When the thief is lacking, means there's nowhere for him to steal, nafsheh l'shalma nakit. He holds himself to be a peaceful or a humble person. So the way Rashi explains this expression is, if a thief doesn't have anywhere to steal from, so he doesn't blame his lack of thievery on not being able to steal, there's no location to steal, but rather he blames it on, or he accredits it to, the fact that he's really a humble and upstanding person. So what she was saying to David is, you're saying you can't marry me because you already have 18 wives. Actually, and it's very difficult to understand how she could say this to the king, but actually because you're old, you're not physically able to have relations, you're not physically able to marry me, that's why you're not able to marry me. Some of them Mefarshim talk about how she could say this to the king, but that's what the Gemara simple pshat is. So Amar Lehu, so David HaMelech called, he said to the people there, Kiru li Batsheva, call one of my wives who was Batsheva, the mother of Shlomo. The pasuk says, Vatavo Batsheva lamelech hachadra, that Batsheva came to the king in his inner room. And Amar of Yehuda, if you look at the pasuk, it is 13 words. So from this we deduce Amar of Yehuda Marav, be'ota sha'ah, at that time, kincha Batsheva b'shlosh esleid mapot. Batsheva cleaned herself with 13 cloths. So what does that mean? Rashi says, it means that David HaMelech had 13 acts of intimacy with her, and in between each one, she cleaned herself from that act of intimacy. But the point is, the psukim follow one and the other, is that Avishag said that he couldn't have relations. He said, no, I could, and he had intimacy with his wife Batsheva 13 times to highlight that he was able to. Now, this is a very difficult story. What her claim against him is, what his response, as if to prove his masculinity almost, needs an explanation, but we're going to learn a kipshuto, and that's the pshat. Let's continue. Amar Rav Shem bar Abba. Rav Shem bar Abba says, moving on to the next section, Bo re'eh kama kashin gerushin. You see how difficult, how hard is divorce. Problematic. Did I skip? I skipped, sorry. Back up a second. Amar Rav Shem bar Abba. Bo re'eh. No, I actually read. Please, yeah. Bo re'eh kama kashin gerushin. You see how difficult from this story is divorce. Sharei David HaMelech hitir lo liached, because we know, even though in the days of David, after the story of Amnon and Tamar that we learned earlier, there was a gzeira made by David, it's Beit Din, that you're not allowed to be miached, go in seclusion with even a single girl. So even though there was such a gzeira, they permitted Avishag to have seclusion along with David. So they permitted that, but velo itir lo legarish. They did not permit him to divorce one of his wives. Meaning to say is, theoretically, he could have divorced one of the 18 and married Avishag. That would have been fine. But he rather override the gzeira about yichud, seclusion with a pnuya, and not divorce one of his wives. You see how harsh or difficult is divorce. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says on this note, anyone that divorces his first wife, this is a Gemara at the end of Masechet Gittin. Even the Mizbeach cries about him. Like it says in Malachi, it says, Vezot shenit tasu. This is the second thing that you've done. Kasod dim'at Mizbach Hashem. You've caused the Mizbeach of Hashem to be covered in tears. Bechiva anaka, crying and moaning. Me'en od pinot el amincha. He shall no longer turn to the flower offerings. Or take the desirable things from your hand. In the pasuk there says, you'll say, why did this happen? Because Hashem has testified between you and your wife of your youth, the first wife, that you rebelled against her, meaning you divorced her, and she is your friend and the wife of your treaty. So it means to say is the Mizbeach is crying tears because you divorced your first wife. So you see from this also the harshness of divorce. Now it's important to note over here, the Gemara is saying seemingly it's harsh, but there are times, unfortunately, that divorce is just the necessary option. However, as we see from the Gemara, it's really the last resort. It's a maybe necessary sometimes, but last resort option because you see the severity of it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'item Rabbi Eliezer. Ein ishto shel adam meita. This is a Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah also. It says a person's wife will not die. Ein ishto shel adam meita eli im ken mevakshin mimenu mamon ve'en lo. Unless they're seeking money from him and he does not have that money. That's very interesting. What does that mean? So he owes people money and he doesn't have the funds to pay it back. Now, it's not clear from this sugya, does that mean where, is a pretty severe thing, his wife will die if people seek money from him and he doesn't have to pay it. So it's not clear if this is where he borrowed and he doesn't have to pay back, or if he stole. But it would appear, based on Rashi and Zvachim, just looking at the art scroll here, it's where he stole from other people and he does not have the money to pay it back. So perhaps with loans, it wouldn't be necessarily as severe. Says the Gemara, again, so the Gemara says, how do we know that a person's wife only dies if he doesn't pay back thievery, he doesn't have money to pay back, ve'en lo, mevakshin mimenu mamon ve'en lo. Shene'emar, it says in Mishlei, ve'im ein lecha leshalem, if you don't have what to pay, lama yikav mishkavcha mitachtecha. Why should Hashem take away? Literally means what you sleep with from under you, your bed from under you. But the drasha here is, your wife is the reference of the pasuk of Mishkavcha mitachtecha, and if you don't have what to pay, so Hashem will take that wife away as punishment. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, continues Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Adam Shemeta Ishto Rishon, anyone that his first wife dies, Ke'ilu Charav Beit HaMikdash Biyamav, it's so severe as if the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed in his life. Shene'emar, as it says in Yechezkel, it says Ben Adam, and in the context of the Navi there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yechezkel, we're about to see, that his wife is going to die, and as we'll see, there's a parallel made between his wife dying and the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed. It's a prophecy. As it says, Ben Adam hineni lokeach mimcha et machamad einecha b'magefa. I will take the treasure of your eyes, the desirable thing of your eyes, away in a plague. Lo tisbed velo tivkeh, you shall not eulogize or cry. Velo tavod dimatcha, your tears shall not fall. So he calls, as we'll see, the wife of Yechezkel, Machamad Einecha, the desirable things of your eyes, the treasure of your eyes. Yechtiv, and the pasuk continues and says, V'adaber la'am, I spoke to the people, Yechezkel says, Baboker in the morning, V'tamat ishti ba'erev, and my wife died in the evening. So we see Machamad Einecha as a reference to his wife, after and she passed away. And the pasuk says, "Ineni mechalel mikdashi." Hashem tells Yechezkel, "I will desecrate my holy place. I'll destroy the Beit Hamikdash. Ge'onuzchem, the might of your, or the glory of your might. Machamad einechem, the desirable thing of your eyes." So we see the pasuk equates Machamad einechem is the wife passing away and the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash. Unbelievable thing. If somebody loses a wife, we have to be so sensitive. It's like the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed in his days. Chas v'shalom lo aleinu. Although it does say over here, in the diuk, it says Ishto Rishona. Very interesting, the first wife. Amar Alexandri, Kol Adam Shemita Ishto Biyamav. Anyone, now it says a general, his wife passes away in his lifetime. Olam Choshech Ba'ado. So the same emphasis over here. The world is dark for him. If someone hasn't lost his wife, Baruch Hashem, he's blessed. But if someone does, we have to be so sensitive. The world becomes dark for such a person. Shene'amar, like it says in Iyov, it says, Or choshech be'alo. Light has become dark in his tent. Rashi says tent is a reference to your wife. V'neiro alav yidach, and the candle has been extinguished. It's a reference that when his wife passes away, it's like total darkness. Unbelievable. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says even further, Psiotav mitkatzrot. If somebody loses his wife, his steps become shortened. It's almost like he loses a step. Shene'amar, like the pasuk says, it says there in Iyov, it says Yetzrot Sa'adi Ono. The strength of his steps has become shortened. Rabbi Avahu Amar Atzato Nofelet. Even his advice is fallen, meaning inability to give proper advice. Shene'amar, like it says, Vatashlicheu Atzato, he's thrown away his advice. And we're going to stop here. We'll continue on tomorrow towards the bottom of Chaf Bet Amud Aleph. We'll continue on discussing this topic, this concept of wife, the idea of zivugim, losing a wife, etc. And we'll turn tomorrow to Chaf Bet Amud Bet as well. But in the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day and all the best.